I have the great pleasure of introducing Clint as our first speaker. And a fun fact about him, Clint is from Alaska, and his family was invited to Russia when he was a toddler. And they were the ambassadors from the U.S., and he got lost. So in a different world, Clint could have been a little Russian boy. But thank God to the newspaper picture of him, a nice woman found him, saw him babbling in English, and returned him to his parents. Clint.
Thank you, Ankita. So as Ankita said, I was born and raised in Alaska in the Chugach Mountains, kind of a rural area. And, you know, we lived a subsistence lifestyle. Most of the meat that we ate was game and fish that we'd killed ourselves. So much so that the first time I went to McDonald's at the age of 4 or 5, I got a hamburger, and I asked my mom, is this moose or caribou? And she said, it's cow. And I said, cow moose or cow caribou? Because that's what you call a female moose. So anyway, both my parents were incredible outdoorsmen. And they raised me from a young age to sort of live off the land, to go camping, to fell trees, to skin animals. And importantly, they taught me how to build a fire. And most of the people in here have probably built a fire before, and you're like, it's pretty easy. You put the match under the burny stuff, and it burns. But the tricky part is when the burny stuff doesn't burn. And this is one particular story about how to build a fire. So I was 14 years old. And we were in the middle of nowhere, about 70 miles from the nearest village, up this dirt road, really, out in the middle of nowhere. And we were planning this, 2-week-long hunting expedition where we were going to raft out this river. And my job was to carry our 900 pounds of gear from the road 1 mile down this trail to the river. And my dad had to drive the car, for hours around to the other end of the river so that we had a car waiting for us on the other end. And then we were going to meet back at the road at 10 p.m. Remember that. And so I start, put on my backpack, and I start going along and moving stuff down to the river. And it's a chilly day. It's probably high 40s, a little bit rainy. But, the forest, it smells nice, and you're going over these cliffs, and it's just really beautiful, and I'm in great spirits. I'm just like working hard, so I'm staying warm. And eventually, just to pass the time, I start singing. And as soon as I start singing, these wolves start howling all around me. And if you've never heard wolves howling in the wild, it's kind of hard to describe. It's on the one hand, extremely beautiful and otherworldly, and on the other hand, it's kind of terrifying and bone-chilling. And, as soon as I started hearing these wolves, I stopped and got pretty freaked out. But, I felt my pistol on my hip, and, it's daylight out, and I thought, wolves don't attack people, right? And so, I kept going along and kept on singing, and, the wolves kept harmonizing, and it felt like really special. Me and the wolves are singing together. And so I did this all day long, ended up doing 9 trips, 18 miles total. Eventually got down to 8:30 p.m. It was dusk, get back to the road, and I sit on this chest that's like a cooler, is the last thing that's left. And so I sit on there. There's nothing inside it but a rubber raincoat and an empty Coleman lantern. And, I'm feeling warm because I've been working hard, but, as the dark sort of envelops me, it gets cooler. And, this is the kind of dark that you don't really experience in the city much. It's an absolute darkness, like the absolute vacuum of space. You put your hand in front of your face and you can't see it. And, it's a little unnerving to be in a place that's that dark in the middle of nowhere with wolves howling all around you. And, and then it starts to get chilly, and then the temperature drops quite quickly down to about 10 degrees, well below freezing. And a cold breeze comes in, and everything starts to freeze. And my hair freezes on my head, and my clothes freeze to my body, and all of the mud freezes, and the trees freeze that are covered in rain. And I put this raincoat on to keep myself warm because I'm just wearing like a T-shirt, and I'm all wet. And I start to shiver, and so I get in kind of a fetal position, and I'm wrapped up in my raincoat. I have my arms in my raincoat and kind of wrapped around me, and I just start shivering harder and harder until, the shivers become kind of convulsions over my whole body. And I'm just shivering for hours, and, 9 o'clock passes, 10 o'clock passes when my dad's supposed to be there, 11 o'clock passes, and I'm shivering so hard and so long that, my muscles are hurting from shivering so hard. And my morale is getting really low, and, I keep thinking that I hear a car in the distance, and there's nothing there. And, just when I think it's not going to get any worse, I start singing to lift my spirits, and wolves start howling all around me. And whereas before, the wolves kind of kept their distance, now they're like, we have a victim in the darkness. And so I hear their howls getting closer, and I start hearing their little barks that they do after their howls, and I start hearing their breath, and I hear their feet, crunching the twigs and like turning over the leaves as they're stepping. And I start freaking out, and I jump up, I pull out my pistol, I load around in the chamber, and I think, if I'm going down fighting. But it's dark, and if they were 5 feet in front of me, I wouldn't be able to see them. And so then this idea comes into my mind, make a fire. I don't know why I hadn't thought of it earlier. And so I can't see anything, so I put away my gun, and I start feeling around for sticks, and I'm remembering all these things my parents had taught me about, using the witch's broom from the trees as tinder, and pulling the twigs that are at the base of the spruce, and breaking into little pieces. And so I build a little pile of tinder, and I, pull out my matches and try to get it going, but the wind blows out the matches. Go through all my matches, and then I pull out my lighter, and I build a little windbreak, and I get down there, and I'm just holding my lighter under the frozen tinder to try to get it going. And, it's sizzling a little bit, but just not really taking. And I keep doing it till, my thumb is sizzling. It's just but I can't feel anyways because my whole hands are frozen. And eventually, I realize this isn't going to work, and I need some better tinder. So I cut 3 inches off of the bottom of my pant leg, which is cotton, and shred it into little pieces, and I put it under the tinder, and I light it. And, these flames just surge up, and it's just this feeling of hope, and I feel almost like laughing. I'm so happy because, the flames illuminate all around me what has been dark, and get really hopeful, and I feel this heat on my face, and the smoke, rising up, and I get really excited, and the flames from the burning cotton start to catch the sticks, and I'm feeling really good, and then a gust of wind comes and blows it out. And I feel like my hope is dashed away. And so I cut off a little bit more of my pant leg. I put it under there. I light it up. Fire starts. Wind comes, blows it out. I keep doing this until I cut all the way up to my knee. And so I'm sitting there with one knee in the frozen dirt and trying to get it going. And then my lighter runs out of butane. And I'm like, oh, shit. And so I go back to my fetal position and shivering and huddling. And it's 1 a.m. And then at 2 a.m., the sort of convulsive shivers stop. And it's not because it's gotten warmer. It's because, my body has basically given up. And I start getting extremely tired so that I can barely stay awake. And I can just feel myself fading away. And I realize I'm not, not getting warmer. I'm getting hypothermic. And so this thought goes through my mind, Clint, you idiot. You've been raised your whole life to build a fire and to live in the woods. And now you can't even build a fire when push comes to shove, and you can't make it one night on your own in the woods. And now you're going to die and be eaten by wolves. And it was really disconcerting. And so, in kind of a desperate moment, I tried to think of what my options were. And before the trip, I'd sort of memorized the maps for the area. And I remember that there was a cabin somewhere down the road. I didn't know how far. It might have been 2 miles. It might have been 10 miles. But I knew somewhere down there was a cabin. And so I just start walking. And it's so dark that, I would walk off the road and, run into a tree and not know there was a tree there until my face hit it. But I eventually made my way after an hour or two, and I hear a generator in the distance, and I get excited. I start running, and then I see a light, and then there's a line of cabins. And I'm super excited, and I go to the first cabin, and I knock on it. No answer. I go to the second cabin, I knock on it, no answer. And all the way down this line of 7 cabins, no answer. So I go back to the first cabin, knock on it, no answer. Second cabin, knock on it. Go all the way down the line. And when I'm at the last cabin, somebody opens the door at the first cabin. And then, I tell them my story, they let me stay there for the night. I end up reconnecting with my dad in the morning. There were all these reasons why he was delayed, and it was kind of, happily ever after. And now you're probably thinking, Clint, you said this is a story about how to build a fire, and you couldn't even build the darn fire. But the point is that, when push comes to shove, as prepared as you are, as much as you think ahead of time, as much as you've practiced, sometimes you find yourself in situations where you're not really ready for it, and basically you fail. And when that happens, what is going to be the thing that keeps you from just giving up and motivates you to go on? And at those times, you always think that hope is going to be there, and that's kind of the classical story. But I found that when I find myself in these situations, hope is never there. But what is there is fear. Fear of death, fear of shame, fear of failure, fear of regret. And over the years, I've realized that fear isn't necessarily this negative thing, but, I've learned to embrace fear, and I use it as a tool, and it sort of guides me. And, there's almost a comfort in this, fear that's keeping you in check and motivating you to go on. And, as I've, on all sorts of times, hunting, mountaineering, doing a startup, switching careers here at Sloan, I've used fear as a major motivator and major tool in my decision making, and I think that it's a valuable thing that we should all take into consideration. Thanks.
I should say, Clint, if I were in your shoes, I would almost certainly be dead.